As the sun dipped below the horizon of Theron Prime, casting elongated shadows over the neon-lit cityscape, Commander James Staylor stood silently on the observation deck of the Guardian. His gaze was fixed on the swirling storms of the gas giant Priam, a radiant jewel against the void. The weight of the impending mission pressed down on him, heavy as the starlight that filtered through the cosmos. Theron Prime, with its promise of peace and prosperity, now lay under the dark shadow of the Marauders, and it was up to him to lead the liberation. The neon lights below flickered like the last beats of a dying heart, mirroring the turmoil that had gripped the once vibrant trade hub. James' hands clenched at his sides as he replayed the Council's briefing in his mind. Walker Vex, the renegade who dared challenge the Galactic Union, had taken the planet hostage. James felt a personal sting in Walker's betrayal. They had once stood side by side as defenders of the frontier. Now they stood on opposite ends of a war that could tear the galaxy apart. The deck hummed softly beneath his feet, the ship alive with the thrum of engines and the quiet murmur of his crew preparing for battle. Each sound was a reminder of the lives that depended on his decisions, not just aboard the Guardian but across Theron Prime. The metallic tang of ionized air mingled with the faint odor of engine oil, crafting the ever-familiar scent of space travel that James found both comforting and unsettling at the moment. Turning away from the viewport, he stepped back into the command center, the room bathed in the soft glow of holographic displays and the harsher blue light from the star maps. Lieutenant David approached, his expression a mask of determination masking his underlying concern. "Everything's set, Commander," David reported, his voice steady. "The crew's ready, though there's chatter about what we're heading into." James nodded, feeling the weight of their stares. Each crew member seemed to search him for assurance, the kind that he himself was desperately grappling with. "Tell them we're not just fighting for control, but for the heart of the Union. We're the shield against chaos," he said, his voice firm, attempting to embody the resolve he hoped to instill in his team. As he walked through the corridors of the Guardian, the ship's steel walls echoed with the soft steps of his boots. The digital panels along the corridor walls displayed tactical data, but it was the photos of Theron Prime, its markets, children, and sprawling parks that caught his eye. They were fighting for those faces, those unseen lives that now lay under the shadow of tyranny. Reaching the strategy room, James convened his senior officers. The holographic projector illuminated their determined faces as they discussed approach vectors, potential skirmishes, and non-combatant safety. Each decision sliced through James like a laser, cold and precise. But beneath that clinical exterior, his heart mourned the necessity of conflict. He knew the cost of war, measured not in resources or territory, but in the silent grief of those who would inevitably lose loved ones. As the meeting dispersed, James remained alone in the strategy room, the star map flickering before him. His reflection in the glass was a ghost amidst the stars, a specter of duty bound to the fate of thousands. Tonight, the cosmos watched quietly, and James felt its vast indifferent gaze challenging him to rise to the occasion. With a deep, stealing breath, he turned away from the stars. The journey ahead would test him, not just as a commander, but as a guardian of peace and human dignity. As he stepped out, his resolve hardened. This battle was not just his own. The story had begun, and James Staylor was ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead, for Theron Prime, for the Union, and for the fragile peace that held the galaxy together. The Guardian hurtled through the cosmos, its hull a gleaming spear piercing the blackness of space, leaving a wake of shimmering energy as it neared Theron Prime. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with a palpable tension, the crew acutely aware of the impending confrontation. Commander James Staylor walked the cramped, humming corridors of the ship, his presence a calming force among the whispers of apprehension. Lieutenant David joined him as they approached the launch bay. "We're approaching the Marauders' blockade, sir," David said, his voice betraying a hint of concern beneath his composed facade. "The first line of defense," James nodded, his jaw set. "Deploy the recon drones. I want eyes on their formation before we engage." The launch bay doors slid open with a hiss, revealing the vast expanse of space. Drones, like silver fish in a celestial sea, darted out into the void, streaming live data back to the Guardian. In the dim light of the control room, James and his crew watched the holographic displays paint a picture of the blockade, a network of rogue ships that formed a menacing chain around Theron Prime. "Sir, they've fortified their positions around the orbital docks," Engineer Ambassador pointed out, indicating the strategic points on the hologram. "Heavy artillery, shielded turrets, and they've got interceptors ready to launch." "It's a full lockdown," James mused, his mind racing through tactics. "We'll need to break their line without risking the planet's infrastructure. Prepare the EMP cannons. We'll disable their front line and move in before they can re-engage their systems." The battle strategy took shape swiftly, each officer contributing a piece of the puzzle. The Guardians' cannons were charged, their barrels glowing with contained energy, ready to unleash a storm upon the marauders. As the ships drew closer, the cold vacuum of space was soon filled with the chaos of battle. The Guardian shook violently under the barrage of enemy fire, the sound a dull roar muffled by the ship's reinforced hull. James stood firm, his eyes fixed on the forward screens, watching as their EMP pulse hit the first line of marauder ships, their lights flickering out like dying stars. "Move in, target their main artillery. I want those guns silent," James commanded. The crew responded with precision, their training evident as the Guardian weaved through the disoriented enemy fleet, its guns blazing with retaliatory fire. In the heart of battle, the lines between survival and destruction blurred. The Guardian's hull was scored by enemy fire, alarms blaring their warnings as systems strained under the onslaught. Lieutenant David relayed targeting instructions, his voice a steady constant amid the cacophony of battle. Through the strategic genius of James and the valor of his crew, a path was cleared through the blockade. The Guardian surged forward, piercing through the chaos toward Theron Prime. But the victory was tempered by the cost. The deck was strewn with the casualties of war, each face a reminder of the brutal reality of their mission. In the aftermath, as the smoke cleared and the adrenaline faded, James allowed himself a moment to reflect. They had breached the blockade, but this was just the first step. Theron Prime loomed ahead, its cities still under the dark shroud of Walker Vex's rule. As he surveyed the damage to his ship and crew, James felt the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. They needed to regroup, to heal, but time was a luxury they did not have. "Repair what you can. Treat the wounded. We push forward at dawn," James declared to his officers. Their nods were filled with resolve and fatigue, the dual burdens of those who fight not just for victory, but for peace. As the Guardian orbited the war-torn Theron Prime, the aftermath of the blockade run lingered like a shadow over the crew. Commander James Staylor stood at the observation deck, gazing down at the planet below. The once vibrant cities were now dimmed, the neon lights obscured by smoke, and the occasional flash of distant explosions. It was a painful sight, the beauty of Theron Prime marred by conflict and chaos. Below, Walker Vex, the leader of the Marauders, orchestrated his reign from a commandeered governmental palace. The building was a fortress now, surrounded by anti-air defenses and patrolled by drone sentries. Walker, with his keen strategic mind and iron will, had transformed the planet's capital into a stronghold. Inside the palace, Walker paced before a massive digital map, the locations of his forces and defensive installations blinking like stars in a dark sky. His second-in-command, a stern-faced woman named Zara, updated him on their resource stocks and troop readiness. Walker's eyes, cold and calculating, never left the map. "Increase patrols in the residential sectors," he ordered. "I want no surprises." Meanwhile, back on the Guardian, James convened a meeting with his senior officers in the war room. The air was thick with urgency as they debated their next move. Lieutenant David suggested a direct assault, but James was wary of the potential for civilian casualties. "We need another way," James insisted, his voice firm. "Something that strikes at Walker without harming the people we're here to protect." Engineer Ambassador, a young but brilliant tactician, proposed a daring plan. If we could infiltrate their communications network, we could sow confusion in their ranks, isolate their command structure from the ground forces. James considered the idea, nodding slowly. Do it. Prepare a team. David, you'll lead the insertion. Ambassador, get your best techs on the comms hack. As preparations began, James took a moment for himself in his quarters. The walls were lined with images of his family and mementos from his career. He touched a framed photo of his late wife, her smile a bittersweet memory. For you, he whispered, steeling himself with the personal stakes of his mission. The infiltration team, led by Lieutenant David, was a mix of combat veterans and tech specialists. They deployed under the cover of darkness, using cloaked shuttles to land discreetly on the planet's surface. The city was a labyrinth of shadow and light, the streets deserted as the populace hid from the ongoing conflict. David's team moved through the abandoned thoroughfares, avoiding patrols and navigating towards the communications hub, a towering structure that pierced the night sky. Inside, they encountered minimal resistance, as most of the marauders were focused on defending the palace. Ambassador guided the team remotely, hacking into the hub's mainframe. Almost there, she murmured, her fingers flying over her console back on the Guardian. With a triumphant beep, she breached the last firewall, and the marauders' communications network flickered under her control. Broadcasting confusion, she announced. The screens in the hub lit up with false orders and misleading information. Across the Ron Prime, marauder forces hesitated, their coordination broken. The effect was immediate and chaotic. Walker's forces, now unsure of who to trust, began to falter. Walker himself realized the breach as his screens went dark, his fury palpable. Find the intrusion, now, he bellowed, slamming his fist against the console. Back on the Guardian, James watched the situation unfold, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. Keep the pressure on, he ordered. Every second we confuse them is a second in our favor. As dawn broke over Theron Prime, the streets began to stir. The citizens, sensing the shift, watched as the Guardian's forces advanced. Hope, a fragile thing, began to blossom amid the ruins. James knew the hardest part of the battle lay ahead, but this victory, small as it might be, bolstered his resolve. Theron Prime was not lost, not yet, and as long as he had breath, he would fight for its future. In the war room, the crew of the Guardian gathered, their faces set with determination. The next phase was clear: take down Walker, restore order, and save Theron Prime. James looked at each of them, his heart swelling with pride. Together they were more than a crew. They were guardians of peace. As dawn broke over the embattled landscapes of Theron Prime, the light filtered through the smoke and debris, casting long shadows across the ruins of what was once a bustling marketplace. Amidst this backdrop, the crew of the Guardian prepared for what was anticipated to be the most formidable phase of their mission, a direct assault on Walker Vex's stronghold. Commander James Staylor stood before his assembled crew in the hangar, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his team, each marked by the resolve that had carried them this far. This is where we turn the tide, James declared, his voice resonant in the charged atmosphere. Today we dismantle the Marauders' grasp on Theron Prime. Remember, our objective isn't just to defeat Walker, but to free the citizens of this world from tyranny. The hangar buzzed with the final preparations for departure. Pods loaded with gear, medics checking their supplies, and pilots performing last-minute checks on their shuttles. Lieutenant David rallied his strike team, a specialized unit tasked with breaching the palace defenses. Meanwhile, Engineer Ambassador coordinated with her tech team to maintain the disruption in the Marauders' communications, ensuring that the chaos they had sown continued to hinder enemy responses. Keep the pressure. Every second of confusion is a second we own, she instructed, her eyes locked on the flickering screens that displayed the status of their digital warfare. The assault began with a coordinated strike at the outer defenses of the palace. Guardian drones swooped down from the sky, their weapon systems targeting anti-aircraft installations that erupted in flames upon impact. Ground troops moved in seamlessly, using the cover of smoke to advance towards the palace gates. James, aboard one of the lead shuttles, observed the progress with an intense focus. Each explosion marked a step closer to their goal, but also a reminder of the dangers that lay ahead. As the shuttle landed on a makeshift base near the palace, he was met with the sounds of gunfire and the sharp scent of ionized air, a stark testament to the battle that raged. David's strike team used a series of underground tunnels, maps of which had been secretly provided by sympathetic citizens, to infiltrate the palace. They emerged within the inner courtyard, a vast area that was eerily quiet, the calm before the storm. They set charges on the main doors, and with a deafening roar the entryway was breached, signaling the start of the interior assault. Inside the palace, the decor was a stark contrast to the war outside. Lavish tapestries hung from the walls, and opulent statues lined the hallways, each a silent witness to the battle invading their domain. The team moved with precision, clearing room after room, each corner potentially hiding an enemy combatant. James joined the ground forces, his weapon at the ready, as they ascended the grand staircase towards Walker's command center. The sound of their boots echoed ominously through the halls, punctuated by the distant sounds of ongoing combat. As they approached the command center, the resistance intensified. Marauder soldiers, loyal to Walker to the end, mounted a fierce defense, utilizing advanced combat tactics and heavy weaponry. The battle for the command center was grueling, with both sides suffering casualties. James, leading from the front, showcased his combat prowess, moving with a determined grace under fire. His team covered him, their coordination a testament to their rigorous training and unwavering trust in each other. After what felt like an eternity, they breached the command center. The room was a high-tech hub of operations, screens displaying strategic maps and live feeds of the battlefields. And there, standing defiantly with his hand on a console, was Walker Vex. The room fell into a tense standoff, James and Walker locking eyes. "This ends now, Walker," James stated, his weapon trained on the rogue commander. Walker's expression was unreadable, his gaze icy. "You think defeating me will end this? It will only ignite a larger fire." The confrontation was interrupted by a sudden surge in gunfire outside the command center, signaling that the last of the Marauders' forces were making their final stand. James realized the moment of decision was upon him: capture Walker and effectively cripple the Marauders' command structure, or face the possibility of prolonged conflict. With the resolve that had brought him this far, James made his choice. "Surrender, Walker. It's over." The command center was tense, the air thick with the crackle of disrupted communications, and the distant echoes of battle resounding through the opulent corridors of Walker Vex's stronghold. Outside, the tide of combat swayed under the smoke-filled skies of Theron Prime, but inside, a different kind of confrontation was unfolding, one that would determine the course of the planet's future. Walker Vex, his back against the sophisticated holographic panels displaying the crumbling defenses of his regime, faced Commander James Staylor, whose presence dominated the room. "You don't understand, James." Walker spoke with a grim calmness, his voice a blend of defiance and resignation. "This was never just about power. It was about change. Change that the Galactic Union is too afraid to implement." James maintained his aim, his expression unreadable. "Change brought through fear and subjugation is no change worth fighting for, Walker. You've terrorized the very people you vowed to protect." The standoff was momentarily interrupted as Lieutenant David entered, his armor marked with the scars of battle. "Commander, the palace is secured. What are your orders?" James nodded, not taking his eyes off Walker. "Secure him," he ordered. David moved forward, handcuffing Walker without resistance. As Walker was led away, his eyes met James's one last time, a silent exchange of what could have been, what should have been. With Walker detained, James directed his attention to the restoration of order. He activated his communicator. "This is Staylor. Walker is in custody. Begin Phase 2. We're restoring the city's control systems." Engineer Ambassador, stationed on the Guardian in orbit, responded promptly, her voice a beacon of efficiency. "Acknowledged, Commander." reintegrating the city's systems now. As James exited the command center, he surveyed the damage inflicted upon the palace. The once immaculate hallways were scarred by the ravages of combat, the walls pitted from gunfire, the luxurious carpets soaked with the stains of battle. It was a stark reminder of the cost of liberation. The crew of the Guardian began the meticulous process of aiding the city's recovery. Medical teams were dispatched to treat both civilians and soldiers, while engineering squads worked to repair critical infrastructure damaged during the siege. Meanwhile, James met with Theron Prime's provisional leaders, individuals who had either gone into hiding during Walker's reign, or who had bravely opposed him from the shadows. In the war-torn remnants of a city council hall, they gathered around a makeshift table, maps and digital devices scattered about. One of the leaders, a middle-aged woman named Mara, who had led a resistance cell, spoke earnestly. "Commander Staler, we are grateful for your intervention, but what happens now? How do we ensure this doesn't happen again?" James acknowledged her concerns with a nod. "The Union will support you in setting up a transitional government. It's crucial that the power returns to the people of Theron Prime, through fair representation and democratic processes." As the meeting unfolded, James's communicator buzzed, a signal from the Guardian. He excused himself and stepped into the shattered quietude of what was once a bustling government building. "Staler here," he answered. "Commander, we've detected a distress signal from the outer colony." Ambassador's voice came through, tinged with urgency. "It's faint, but it's consistent. It appears to be a plea for help." James's sense of duty flared. "Coordinate with the fleet. Plot a course." "Yes, sir. Preparing for your orders." Returning to the council, James shared the news. "I have to leave a distress signal from the outer colony. But rest assured, the Guardian will remain in orbit, and additional Union forces are on their way to assist during this transition." Mara nodded, understanding the broader responsibilities of the Union's forces. "We are grateful, Commander. Safe travels, and may the stars guide you." As James departed Theron Prime, he left behind a planet on the cusp of rebirth, its people resilient in the face of adversity. As the Guardian set its course toward the new distress signal, James looked back at the receding planet, a mix of hope and melancholy in his heart. As the Guardian sliced through the velvet tapestry of space, the stars seemed to nod in silent approval of its mission. Commander James Staler stood at the observation deck, watching the distant nebulae swirl in a dance of cosmic forces. The distress signal from the outer colony had pulled them away from Theron Prime, a world slowly stitching itself back together under the watchful eyes of the Galactic Union. Now, new challenges awaited beyond the horizon. The bridge was alive with activity, the crew efficiently navigating the complexities of deep space travel. "ETA to the outer colony is approximately 3 hours, Commander," Lieutenant David reported, his eyes flicking between the screens displaying trajectories and diagnostics. James nodded, his thoughts momentarily drifting back to Theron Prime. He had left a part of himself on that planet, a mix of hope, sorrow, and resolve. But duty called him onward, and he turned his attention to the task at hand. "Prepare all teams for a potential rescue operation. We don't know what we're walking into," he instructed. As the Guardian approached the colony, the distress signal grew stronger, more desperate. It was a small mining colony on the edge of the Union's reach, rarely thought about until now. The signal was a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by those on the fringe. The view from the observation deck shifted as the colony came into sight, a series of domes and structures clinging to a barren rocky planet. The surface was scarred by meteor impacts and harsh winds, a testament to the colony's harsh environment. "Commander, I'm picking up signs of structural damage and there are no power signatures from the living quarters." Ambassador's voice came through the intercom, tinged with concern. James's brow furrowed. "Life signs, scanning now. There are faint life signs, Commander. It looks like they're concentrated in the emergency shelters." The urgency was palpable as the Guardian initiated its descent. The hull vibrated gently as they passed through the thin atmosphere, landing with a soft thud on the sandy surface. James was the first to disembark, flanked by his rescue team, their suits shielding them from the harsh environmental conditions. They moved quickly, their lights piercing the swirling dust as they headed towards the largest shelter. The door was sealed, a standard protocol in emergency situations. David manually overrode the lock, and the door slid open with a hiss, revealing a crowd of haggard colonists. Relief washed over the faces of the survivors as they saw the rescue team. James stepped forward, his voice calm and reassuring. "We're here to help. Are you all right?" A woman who appeared to be in charge stepped forward. "We're alive thanks to the shelters. But we've been hit by a series of meteor strikes. Our power systems are down, and we've been unable to communicate until now." As medical teams attended to the immediate needs of the colonists, James coordinated with his engineers to restore power and communications. Within hours, the colony's lights began to flicker back to life, a small victory amid the vast challenges they faced. With the situation stabilized, James transmitted a report back to the Union, requesting additional support for the colony. His gaze returned to the stars, their endless mysteries whispering of untold stories still to be discovered. As the Guardian prepared to depart, James took one last look at the colony, now buzzing with activity as repair crews worked alongside the colonists. It was a reminder of the resilience of life, even in the darkest corners of the galaxy. Back aboard the ship, as the Guardian set its course back to the heart of the Union, James felt a sense of completion, a chapter closing on yet another challenge met and overcome. The universe was vast, and his journey was far from over, but for now he had made a difference.